Hi friends, welcome to the channel. This is your Govindraj. Thank you very much for watching my previous videos and also sharing it in your network. Today we are going to address an important topic. You know that the upcoming labor codes, these codes are expected to come into force in the next fiscal, and the government is very promising, and most of the states have implemented or drafted the rules, and it is only now very one or two states, and the deadline is 31st March 2025. After that, the central government will take a call on implementation of the codes. In this video, let's understand very briefly what is the financial impact which is going to occur, especially on employer, whether the provisions of the code will bring higher financial burden or impact, or they will have some beneficial provisions for the employer. So this is what we are going to very briefly address in this case. Now if you look at how these codes will impact on the financials of the companies. Now if you look at, there are certain new provisions which are brought in the code. So these actually create additional financial impact on the employers. So let me give you an example. So today, if you look at this medical examination, it is not mandatory for employers largely, except special statutes like Factories Act, Mines and other things. So they have a special provision where in case any employee is involved in hazardous process or dangerous process, then there is an obligation on the employer to get the pre-employment and also once in 6 months or once in a year medical examination. But the codes, especially the OSH and WC code, this is bringing a mandatory medical examination after certain years of age. So this is one. And if you look at the IR code 2020, there is an additional contribution or additional payment which is coming up by worker reskilling fund, where the employer is required to pay 15 days additional wages in case of termination. It is a one time wage. Now similarly, if you look at code on social security code, the contributions on aggregators are coming up. So far these Ola, Uber, Zomatos and Swiggies, they are not paying any social security contributions. Now the code have a provision where these people also are required to pay 1 to 2% as social security contributions. So of course there is a maximum limit of also is available under this code. So because of these new provisions, there are certain payments are going to occur in the hands of employer. Similarly, if you look at new and uniform wage definition under all the four codes, this will change how the calculation of payments to employees and code, social security organizations are going to get calculated. If you look at payments to employees, like for example, how you are going to treat the minimum wages, calculation of bonus, gratuity, leave encashment, compensation in case of accidents, maternity benefit, all these payments are going to get calculated based on the wage definition. So you have currently, there is a wage definition under the statutes, individual statutes, but going ahead there is a common wage definition. Depending on the nature of payment, this will have upward impact on the employer and some will have declining impact also. So payments to social security organization like ESI and Provident, this is also calculation will depend on the new wage definition. Now if you look at how the minimum wages is being dealt currently. Now under Minimum Wages Act 1948, the government is fixing basic and DA, and if your minimum wages, the employer minimum wages on gross wages is more than basic and DA, you don't have to adhere to the government notified basic and DA. So therefore, because you have higher wages. But going ahead, since there is an inclusion part as basic and DA only, you cannot have a liberty to change the basic and DA rates. Now coming back to calculation of bonus. Now the wage definition is available under Bonus Act, where only basic and DA is treated for eligibility condition. Whereas in the case of code, you have to treat the wage definition under the wage, especially looking into the interpretation 1 and interpretation 2. Largely, interpretation 2 is accepted by the experts, which is 50% of your total remuneration will become wage for the purpose of eligibility criteria for bonus. So therefore, the impact on the employer is more and more employees are going to come under the purview of bonus provisions, and of course the eligibility calculations, everything conditions are similar, and the eligibility wage is going to be based on the wage definition, but the ceiling is going to be decided by the government. So these are under the code on wages, especially minimum wages and calculation of bonus. Now coming back to code on social security, the payments related to provident fund, ESI, maternity, gratuity and compensation, all these calculations are going to be decided by the wage what you calculated under the wage definition. Now coming back to provident fund, you have a 15,000 PF wage ceiling, whereas in the code on social security the conditions and eligibility is similar, but however in case the EPFO changes the ceiling to more than 20,000 or 30,000, to that extent your liability is going to get increased. But if you have basic and DA is lesser than the wage ceiling, the new wage definition will click in, where you have to pay on the wage which you treated as per the definition. Coming back to ESI, of course the ESI Act today has got every component covered, but going ahead your 50% of the wages will become wage for the purpose of the code. Now this 50% or 70%, it all depends based on what components you have. See, depending on the nature of your components, then whether it is going to get excluded or whether it is going to included, that is going to be decided. So therefore it is very important to align these components to the wage definition. Coming back to gratuity, this is a very huge impact is coming in the case of gratuity, because currently you are paying the gratuity on basic and DA, whereas going ahead the wage definition will mandate you to pay at least on 50% of the total remuneration. So in order to arrive at what is wage under the wage definition, you will have to look into other videos. I have given a very detailed clarification on this, so therefore you have to look into that. Now coming back to maternity benefit, of course today the woman employee is getting maternity benefit on full salary, but going ahead there are certain components of the wages are not treated as wages, therefore this will have a declining effect or beneficial impact on the employer, whereas for the woman employee she is going to lose certain components as per the maternity benefit. So all these things have dealt very detailed in the paid channel, so you are requested to go and watch this video. Now coming back to compensation in case of workplace accidents, there also if you look at wage definition is full wages, all components, but in the case of code on social security, the wage is treated as per the definition. There are certain components are excluded, and ultimately if you align, 50% of the wages will become wages. That also will have beneficial provision on the employer. Now coming back to IR code, there is a retrenchment compensation. Again the wage definition will come into picture, and employer will have a beneficial advantage. And worker reskilling fund, it is an additional burden. And layoff compensation, there is no change in that, because 50% of the basic and DA under ID Act 1947 under code on similar provisions is there. But coming back to subsistence allowance, now under the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act and under your special statutes, all the wages have to be treated, whereas under the code, the wage under the wage definition, only the included components or the wage you calculate after treating the provision will come into picture. So that will have a beneficial advantage on the employer. Now of course similarly in the case of retrenchment compensation and closure compensation, employer may have a beneficial advantage. However, depending on your statute, depending on your standing orders and the provisions in your policies, if there is a beneficial provision or if there is a conflict, then the employees are going to bring lot of disputes. these calculations will bring more and more disputes in the hands of employees and the employer, because when any benefit is going down, then the employees will not normally accept, and more IR issues will happen. Now coming back to OSH and WC code 2020, if you look at earned leave wages or leave with wages. Now leave with wages normally under Factories Act or your Shops and Establishment Act, it is a daily average rate which you will have to take entire components, whereas anybody goes on leave after the OSH and WC code, the wage under the wage definition will come into picture, and for the leave the employee is going to get lesser wages. In that case, more and more disputes are going to come. And similarly, today leave encashment is not mandatory during the service except few state shops and establishment and special statutes. But under the Factories Act, during the tenure of service, leave encashment is not mandatory. But whereas the code, especially if you look at section 32, this will have a mandatory provision that if the leave balance exceeds 30 in any given calendar year, at the end of the calendar year worker can demand the leave encashment. So therefore this is going to become a mandatory condition, and this will have, if you do not have a leave encashment policy during the tenure, then this will have an additional impact on you. Now let us look at extra wages for overtime. So normally under the statutes of shops and establishment and under your Factories Act, you will have to consider all wages, all components of wages for calculation of overtime wages, and you are paying double the overtime wages. And I am also aware that in some of the establishment you are paying overtime on basic and DA, which is incorrect practice in my view, and you have to take all the wages and you have to pay double as per the statutes. Now similarly under code on under section 14 of the code, you will have to pay double the wages, but the wage will be as per the wage definition. So therefore this is going to have declining or beneficial advantage on the employer. But imagine if the employee is getting paid overtime on the full wages, and because of the wage, the code on wages, if is going to get altered, there are certain components are excluded from the wage, and you are going to calculate based on the new wage, then the employee will not accept, and there will be more and more disputes going to the courts. Now coming back to your notice period, with regard to notice period, when you are giving a resignation or terminating, except the IR code and the ID Act, there are no provisions in the statute. This is going to be purely dealt by the contract of service. But if you are terminating any worker or retrenching any worker under the ID Act, then suppose there is a notice condition and the compensation condition, that will have an impact. But barring that, this is purely dealt as per the provisions of your contract of service. So friends, so in this video I tried to give you very brief information about this financial impact, but however I have dealt in very detailed in the paid channel and very specific to each code, and I have analyzed in detail. So therefore in case you are interested to watch very detailed analysis supporting by the provisions and the current case law, so you are requested to visit the paid channel and look into very specific videos on these things and get subscribed, and please do watch. Thank you very much friends, and watching this video, and I am sure this has benefited your knowledge. And going ahead, I am going to come with more and more videos in this channel, in the free channel also. Therefore stay tuned, and until new video, see you soon friends.